Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. And the sun came out. That has to be a good sign today for this panel. But thank you for spending the afternoon with us. Thank you for Film USA and Stage 32 for hosting this wonderful panel. I'm very excited about our rock star guests and panelists that we have for today. Talking about how you and your project can stand out in the international market. I'm Sara Elizabeth Timmins. I'm going to be moderating today. I am a film producer and a indie film consultant. My company is Life Out Loud Films. And personally, we're going to meet our panelists here in a moment, but I just want to say that I personally am excited about this topic because it was at Cannes last year, and it hadn't been for a few years, and the market has changed so much globally, and my mind was blown at all of the opportunities that are now out there to be able to produce in this international and global market, and I left so excited about all the new potential, and that's something that our panelists are going to talk about today, and hopefully you'll all leave here expanded with new possibilities to get your projects made. So we're going to start and kick it off here and just have each of our panelists take a moment to introduce themselves and give us a little hint as to what it is that they do in this industry. So we are going to start.
Hello. So I'm Segolene Zimmern. I'm half French, half American, so my co-production experience spans both Europe and America. I actually started my career at Studio Canal in Paris for a couple years before moving to LA, and did a lot of work at a Belgian company called Upedia, where we would shoot a lot of American films over in Belgium, including we did Mandy with Nicolas Cage over there, and from there I moved on to Miramax, where I did international sales, and that allowed me to join Tubi, which is a Fox-owned company where I was a buyer for 3 years. So I'll be speaking extensively about my buyer experience and acquisitions for international, but currently I'm no longer a buyer, so any questions about right now. I recently switched over to producing. I got a wonderful opportunity to produce an Australian show starring Elizabeth Hurley, so I'm working on that now, and yeah, I'll pass it along to you.
Oh, gosh. All right. It's loud now. Hi, everyone. I'm Alexia Melocchi from Little Studio Films. I'm a veteran of this industry. I started in 19, so that will be probably my 25th Cannes. And I have been an international sales agent for several years, selling many movies to profit. And then I switched on to producing. I'm a PGA producer with a specialty on international productions because I'm also Italian, so that helps, just like, with my friends here. And I consult on all manners of distribution for 11 theatrical distributors. We pick up movies from, the Lionsgates of the world to The Asylum. It's a big spectrum. And, I'm here to answer any questions. I think about what is selling, what is really getting buyers riled up to want to say, yes, we want to pick up this movie in whatever stage of production. I feel that's what I can offer the most in this panel today, beyond obviously giving advice on co-productions with Italy, Greece, and all that good stuff. So I pass it on to my other friend over here, Sidney.
Hi everyone, my name is Sidney Chiu, based out of Toronto, Canada. I'm a feature film producer, and I've been working in this industry producing for about 20 years, for the last few years focusing on international co-productions, treaty co-productions if you're familiar with that term. And we'll get into sort of the nuances of both, but really, as a producer, I get brought on board to help filmmakers figure out how do we finance this project using government resources, using private resources, and oftentimes as a Canadian, company, we kind of wear the both hats that we're North American, so we have some of the American mentality and how we finance projects, but we also work with a lot of European. The last few projects I worked on was the last one was South Africa, a romantic comedy called Love Jack that's on Netflix. And then before that was a German-Canadian co-production called Coconut Hero that was nominated for Lola. And so very broad range and then unofficial co-productions with China and Cuba as well too. So it just gives me, a fairly wide range of experiences working with different parts of the world, which is very exciting, very privileged that I would get to do that. But now it's mostly figuring out, like, how do we make this money work? And how do we present the project, depending who we're talking to, whether it's a government funding agency versus a sales agent versus a distributor, or it's a private equity. They're all motivated by different things, different aspects. Some it's cultural, some it's industrial, some it's just, I want my money back. And so it's being almost as a producer that chameleon that you have to be different things for different people and present the project in the best way too. So we'll get into that too. Yeah.
And that's why they're all in this panel. So there's a lot of expertise here that we're going to dig into for the next hour. And if you do have questions, please, we're going to have a Q&A at the end. So I would encourage you to just kind of put them aside, jot them down, and we'll address those at the end. But as we get started, just to see who is in the room, how many people do we have here that are producers or creatives from North America? Okay, and then what about European producers, filmmakers, and then all the other territories? All right, and then within the other territory, let's just talk globally here. How many people here have ever done either a co-production or shot a project outside of your current territory? All right, just a few people. So most of you are probably here to get the answers as to how do we do that and how does it get a project made. So let's jump in with the panelists. I think it's important as we start to just kind of give a lay of the land, because just producing a movie in another country is very different than doing an actual official co-production, which is very different than actually producing content for the local language office or broadcaster. So why don't we start and just kind of share with the audience what the differences are in those scenarios that you have. Do you want to start, Sidney?
So, typically coming from Canada, we have this two kind of sense of what a co-production could mean. There's the treaty co-production, which are the, government supported. There are actual government treaties in the audiovisual sector that allows two countries to come together to make one project and maximize the benefits from each country. So, if I do a Canadian-German co-production, it gets the maximum benefits of being a Canadian film, and then I can access all the Canadian funding. And then it also has the benefit of being a German film, and can have access to all the German funding. So from a creative, financial, production sense, we are expanding the world of our film from a financial and creative standpoint, versus, say, a service production or a co-production where it's really, I'm just bringing a big wad of money to another country, going to shoot it there, and maybe get a bit of tax incentives. Much easier in some ways if you can raise all your money, because in a co-production treaty sense, you are splitting the ownership, you are splitting the profits, you are dealing with multiple sources of government agencies and buyers and things like that. So it's a much more complicated process, but you do get all the benefits from all the funding systems available to each of those countries too. So.
Okay, that was great. But I want to speak about the elephant in the room. So, well, first of all, we're living very exciting times, right? Because it does take a village, and we are in a village right now. So it does take a village right now, and more and more people are open to collaborations all over the world, really. Before it used to be, well, if I'm European, I can shoot in Europe. That's not true. You can really shoot anywhere in the world, and it gets very, very exciting. However, this whole tax credit myth, like, there's this misunderstanding, like, well, if I can get a tax credit on Canada, that means I have cash money in hand. And that is the furthest thing from the truth. That is an extra way to protect your investments and your venture capital raisings. But every country has a very long and extensive process to get those tax credits released. And yes, it does help, the financing schemes, but some you get them right away, some you get them in a year, or sometimes they tell you you're going to get them right away, but you actually don't. So, you have to do a lot of research, and this is what I would say when you're creating a story, and Sara and I discussed it, and I'd love to hear your viewpoint on it, because don't just think, how can I make a movie? Oh, look, Malta's giving 40%, or Italy's giving 40%, or Canada, as long as I can shoot in Canada. That should not be a deciding factor when it comes to making a film. You have to have other things in mind, and I'd love to hear what my other producer friends are saying about that. And I'd leave you the stage.
I would say I'm coming from a different perspective, but as a buyer, you would do a lot of Canadian co-pros. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that if you're, we were a platform that has multiple territories, and so we can maximize by having some, an American movie shoot in Canada, and still use that for our Canadian territory, and we count as a broadcaster. I know you have that requirement for Canada, so for us it's also, when you're on the buyer side and on the platform side, it actually is a huge advantage. So I understand what you're saying, where you don't get it right away, but from the platform side is great. So.
But I do agree that, the idea, sorry, I don't know if you're, okay. I do agree that, just chasing after incentives and money and thinking that, just because one, and it's going to be, fighting to the bottom barrel who can give you the most incentives, doesn't necessarily make the most sense, because when people come to me and they want to co-produce with Canada, I ask them, why Canada? Because it's certainly not the easiest countries to shoot in, but you do have great benefits. And I have to ask them, is it a natural fit to do this co-production? Is it because of some creative talent that you want to work with that's from Canada, an environment that you want to work with in Canada? These are, the more solid reasons than just going after, I heard this province has this rebate and it's better, because it does take a long time. It is a complicated process if you don't know what you're doing, and so that's why I always want to say, because again, I've never done a co-production where it's easy. It's always complicated, and constantly working with different authorities, even though they're all providing money, and revising financing plans. I'm working on one now. Canada, Poland, and within Canada, it's Ontario and Quebec. And I'm pretty sure I've revised the financing plan 10 times within the last 3 weeks, because all the different funders wanted different things, and it was just this is fun. Yeah, no, figuring it out.
Yeah, and it's true, because I am doing business with Tubi, with Heather, and it's true. The first thing that they ask, we have a project that shoots in Canada and it's got Canadian tax credits because the producers are Canadian, and they're like, yes, we love that, so it is true. But I also think we have to think about distribution models, right? I mean, the market is changing. The streamers are completely full. There's new, obviously not new, because Tubi has been around, but there's new emerging players and competitive players on the block. But then what happens with the rest of the world? Yes, you get a Tubi deal. How is that going to affect all your other distribution models that sometimes you may need in order to get certain things? For example, Australia, you want to get Australian producers offset, you need to have a distribution commitment from a theatrical distributor in Australia. So how do you handle that? How about those distribution windows? How do you manage all those things? So don't want to scare you off. We don't want to be negative about it. We want to be positive and give you information. And there's definitely a lot of elements that you have to think about when you're trying to create global productions. But the good news is, if you're not WGA writers, there is a whole new world for you guys out there to sell your scripts. So there you have it.
Yes, and I want to back up just a moment and go back to, you're a filmmaker, you have a project, you're considering, okay, how does the global market really benefit me? And we've all said it's not about looking at a list and seeing what percentage is the highest from these territories. So I'd like just for everybody to kind of share some of the other considerations, because now you're talking about different currencies, there's a lot of rules in each of the territories that you might be joining with. So let's kind of give them some insight into some of those other considerations that we need to have.
Okay. We'll use sort of a weird case study or a hypothetical situation that if a producer from another country wants to consider shooting in Canada, they come to me and they say, here's my project, would you like to take a look? And they'll have their pitch deck and all that kind of stuff. But the key things I always keep in my mind is number one, is the script done? Because the number of people who have come to me and there's not a script ready yet, that's really hard for me to gauge of whether or not it makes sense for Canada when I can't read a script for it. It's coming. It's great. Let me know when it's ready. Is there a director attached from that country? Because these are the questions that my mind starts thinking about when I'm considering the co-production, right? Where's the director coming from? Where's the writer coming from, right? Do they have access to talent? What funding sources do they have from their own country that I can supplement from my country too? Because Canada, as big as Canada is, you don't have a lot of private equity. You do rely heavily on government incentives, both from a national funding, provincial funding, and even small regional ones too. So we are, hopefully the magic math is that we can get a good chunk from the government, we We get a good chunk from the co-production country we're working with, from their governments, and then mitigate that risk, as you were saying, of that private financing, whether that is through sales or MG. The smaller that number is, and you can still make the film, the happier tends the investors to be, where it's like, oh, this is great, I can only put in 30% and get the full benefits of making an entire movie, right? And so for me, that's, I'm trying to use co-productions. Again, the story has to make sense. I have to feel like this is a story that's going to appeal to a Canadian audience or a North American audience. The talent attached to it is also very critical, and where the talent's coming from. And the number of times we have to play, and I'm sure you guys, the name game, of what European names work in Canada, what Canadian names work in Europe for cast. And it's like, well, this person was in X, Y, and Z series, but never played in North America, so there's no, relativity to that effect. So it is things that we think as producers when we're, analyzing a project, decide, does this make sense? Because a co-production from beginning to end, it's going to take, 3 or 4 years to finish. Like, all paperwork done aside and things like that. So that's something that's like, I want to commit 4 years of my life going through this thing. It better be worth it.
Yeah. I love what you said about packages and scripts, and there's one thing that came to mind with me is that everybody now is putting comps. And I think comps are a little bit dated, because when you're putting a comp of a movie that was successful, even 10 years ago or 15 years ago, the landscape is very different. So maybe you had Under the Tuscan Sun that at the time made $80 million in the box office. Would Under the Tuscan Sun today make that same amount of money? Sorry. That they make that same amount of money now that the streaming and the theatrical windows are just completely, confusing. So, when you do your comps, so be very, very mindful, because don't try to impress Sidney. Go, hey, that movie from Canada did so. Was that from 20 years ago? Because the business has changed. Even 5 years ago, the business has changed. So yes, mood-wise, tone-wise, that works. It's good. But don't make it your end-all. This is to impress your investors and say, you know what? This movie made so much and mine will make as well. So be mindful of that.
Well, as we're talking about packages, because I know that this is going through the mind of a lot of people out here, because it's a question I hear a lot, is so how would each of you suggest that when you're putting together your comps in your deck, knowing that, hey, it's probably more of a streamer route, we don't have access to the streamer numbers, how would you represent that in a deck?
Maybe Segolene to answer this one. But I think if you're looking at the streamer routes, the comps I think are more from, I think of those comps less about the box office, less about the numbers. Because again, the number of times it's a sci-fi movie and they put a Marvel comp in, it's like, well, that's great if you have Marvel monies. Fantastic, but the reality is you probably don't have Marvel money. So for me, it is more about, if you explain that these comps are more from a tonal or thematic or elements like that paints that picture of it. Because the financial comps, at the end of the day, it's as you said, it's a very change. Like, you don't want to use contemporary comps because the numbers are just going down. So really, at the end of the day, we are just trying to find, give me a good sense of the kind of film you want to make, and then using that comps. And then the stronger that vision is of who the film is for, more than anything else, who's the audience for this film? Like, who in your mind? And that's going to help me present that project too. Because like you said, I need a Canadian distributor in order to access the national funding, for a bigger budget film. And so I have to, and again, in Canada, there's 4 or 5 that I can go to, and I know what the tastes are for each of those distributors. So if you have an understanding of who your audience is, and it's a clear one, then it's easier for me to know that you know what your film is about.
I feel like you hit the nail on the head, because that's so true for platforms too.
Yeah.
I feel like so many times I've been pitched things where it's like, well, this is probably a Hulu project or a Netflix project and not at all a Tubi project.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes it seem like no one's checked out the platform, or that producer doesn't know what movies we make. And so it's just like you've hit the, like you just said, it's like know who your audience is so important. So you might end up doing your deck several different ways, depending on who you're pitching to. But it's so important. Like it's like when, if you look at Netflix's top 10 and if there aren't any horror movies, you probably shouldn't be pitching a horror movie to Netflix, right? So the same thing happens with Tubi. We have a tab that says most watched or most popular. that tells you everything already. Those are the ones that are performing. So if you're seeing that in that page of like 100 movies that are the most watched, and most of it is horror or thrillers or African American content and cast and leads, like that should tell you how to cast. That should tell you what genres to bring to Tubi, things like that. So I don't know if I answered the question.
Yeah.
But yes, I agree with you. Like your deck should be, and your pitch should also be to the platform and to the streamer or whoever you're taking it to.
And I think it's important too to point out that there's a difference between your financial comps and your tonal comps. So if the financial comps don't make sense or you're pitching a series, then go to the tonal comps as to this is the feel and the tone of the film that makes sure that you're not also putting the box office information on there. So if we're gonna look at actually, I think a lot of people assume that Netflix, as an example, right? You've got to go through the North American office. That's how you're going to hit the global audience. But the truth is that a lot of the streamers and the platforms now have local regional offices, whether it's in Amsterdam or, even in Africa. So let's talk about the difference between, really that they have budgets and they have quotas that they need to fill specifically for that region, which is another opportunity for filmmakers. So let's talk a little bit about how that works, and if you have a project specifically in a smaller territory, who do you go to? How do you start that process? What would you recommend? And I know based on an earlier conversation, we talked a lot about trust. Everybody has their trusted companies that they like to work with. So how do you penetrate that as a filmmaker?
Yeah, I think it's always challenging too, because I have projects that are set in Asia, and you thought, yeah, this would be great for like Netflix Asia, and you go to the Singapore office and talk to them, and they realize like, yeah, our budgets are like in US dollar exchange rate much smaller. So it's like, oh, that's not going to work, right? And so yeah, and then the thing with the streamers is that because they're so data driven, it's like the data tells them where the market should go, really. And so I have a friend who works in Netflix London, and I went to see the head of Netflix do a talk at London Screen like 6 months earlier, and said, yeah, so whatever happened, COVID really changed the way streamers were doing business, because at one point it was all about co-productions, traveling around the world, being exotic, and then realized like, wow, COVID really just stopped all that from happening. And they're realizing that when you have local content, whether it's local language or local content stuff going through Netflix, they're seeing better numbers in their own region. So rather than, when my friend explained that they wanted local for global, right? Something that's going to work for a local audience that will appeal to a global audience. So, the example was Squid Game. Who would have thought? Even though it's a great, well-written, has a lot of action and excitement, but it is a Korean series, and Korean series are hot too, which helps. But, they found an amazing audience with globally too. So, but, who knows if it was done in a different way, it would be different. Same with, we were just talking about Spanish language content too. All these places are, if there's an office that is a local one that has, especially for local language, they are keen on looking for things. Now, getting access to them is very challenging because they have their preferred partners and production companies they want to work with. So, sometimes, even in Canada, we do have a Canadian Netflix office, but as far as my knowledge is, they don't have their own autonomy and their own budgets. So ultimately, they're still like, we love your project, we're gonna fight for it, but we have to go down to the US and see whether or not they want to greenlight that. And in Canada, because again, you have a lot of government funding for TV and in film, and because Netflix isn't really certified as a Canadian company as of yet, they don't qualify for a lot of that government access too. So it becomes an interesting situation where you will take a Netflix license for worldwide and try to finance the rest out of the Canadian system too. So.
I agree with you, and I think what's happening, for example, Amazon Europe, it's true, they're going to be wanting more local programming because that's truly what works, right? So you're having Amazon Italy is going to really want Italian programming. So how do you get to Amazon Italy? You need to go to an Italian producer who has a track record with Amazon Italy, who's been doing local programming, but maybe decided one day, because he had she had a lot of success, and they're like, I want exactly what you said. I want local for global. So I want to make I want to go to the next level. And I think these are the people that you need to go to. Because either you're going to go, this is a great idea, and I'm going to pitch it, and I'm going to convert it to the local market, which could be also very profitable, food for thought, or if you insist on wanting to have your own sort of more expanded view of your project, then go to one of those producers who've had a track record having really, really big numbers for their streaming, correspondence of that territory. And then pitch them something and saying, here's the opportunity for you to cross over the pond and do something that also America will respond to, or Canada, or Australia, whatever. So there is another way to sort of reverse engineer. But I don't think that if you could knock on the door of, say, Netflix Italy, you go, hey, guys, Netflix US turned me down, but will you guys take my project? I don't think that's going to happen. So go for the producers with a track record. They like the showrunner game for TV. It's kind of like that equivalent.
And so what a filmmaker that wants to potentially go that route or get attention, they want to stay on cast, because a globally attractive cast, I think, is important. So what should a filmmaker bring to the table? What would be helpful as you're making that next step to get the attention, let's say, in the international market? What would you suggest they attach?
I can only speak to the show that I'm working on now, which is an Australian Canadian co-pro, actually, which I structured that way. But for that reason, we also have to look at cast requirements. So we're looking at either putting also a writer or director, or we have to fill out all of those content rules exactly and requirements. So we do have to always think about how do you shift the composition of your team to adapt to that. But to that end, we also cast someone who is British, someone who's Canadian, and an American, and so we have to meet all the quotas from the different countries, like Australia and Canada, and still have a British person, Elizabeth Hurley, who really works everywhere.
Yeah.
So she's kind of our global part of the local. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Well, what I also wanted to say is that there's a great golden opportunity right now to not even worry about names and cast. I mean, I'm sure before it used to be an embarrassment to say, I have a movie that I can do for 200,000, $500,000, $1 million, and they used to look down on you, and you have to think, I'm going to lie, I'm going to have to tell them it's a $3 million, because otherwise I'm not going to give you the time of day. But those movies right now are selling like hotcakes. If you have a really hot concept, you don't even have to think about cast right now. I mean, yes, you could think about getting a German actor or an Italian, but they don't have to be really names, just to fit the quotas. But you could make those movies, because AVOD is the future. Well, hello Tubi. But there is also that model where you can actually have commercial stuff. Look at The Asylum with Meth Gator. I mean, come on, was that brilliant or what? FYI, got sold out already, so that says it all. Not that I want to stoop to the lowest nomination of quality of film, but that works, and if that's going to make you some money, do it, and then you can do your quality thing with name talent.
Yeah, I think, the name game, it's always a challenging one too, because, value of names, I always get presented this actor is huge in China. That's great for China, but it doesn't necessarily work internationally for me, right? And vice versa too, right? Yeah. And so I think, we're in the business of storytelling, right? And ultimately, if it's a well-told story, what's great about all the streamers and all the digital platforms is that there's just more ways to be able to watch content, right? And so there's a fit for everybody, I like to think, too. And good and bad, because there's just a lot more content that's being made now, too, because the cost of making a movie or a series has come down significantly as technology changes, too. But I always find and again, I get, coming from Canada, the hilarious one, it's so who do you have in mind in cast? Speaking, and it's I'm just going to get one of the Ryans. It's what do you mean one of the Ryans? Ryan Gosling, or, Ryan Reynolds, one of the Ryans, he's Canadian, right? It's yeah, you're right, he is Canadian, but do you have access to one of the Ryans? Is a bigger question. So I think being realistic, and I know, it makes it really easy for me to have those conversations when they're realistic about the cast, and they're bringing in a blend of internationally recognized, but really good local actors as well to make something, because I think it is fresh to see an actor that's really well recognized in a film that gets released internationally. I was lucky on our last film, Love Jack, where Shamir Anderson was an up and rising actor, and we saw the audition tapes and honestly saw like a young Eddie Murphy in his performance. And it was his first leading role, and now he's on John Wick 4, right? And that was just like a few years ago too. It's one of those things where we had Keith David and all these big American actors as well to supplement all that. So.
Well, and I would like, Cindy, if you can explain to everyone, we're throwing around the word quota, and I think it's important to understand, financing in these territories aren't just about writing you a check, but there are often requirements that either Screen Ireland or the Australian Fund do require. So if you're going to put together a package to get somebody's attention, the truth is there are some requirements for you to meet that money.
So what I find in a lot of the countries I work with, the national funds, whether it's Screen Ireland, Screen Scotland, Telefilm Canada, BFI, these are ultimately government agencies that are culturally mandated. They're there for the culture, right, of their country, right? And so their requirements could be things like we have in Canada, for example, a CAVCO point system that you have to score at least 8 out of 10, unless it's a co-production, which makes it a little bit trickier. But for example, if it was just a Canadian film to want to qualify and apply for the national funding, we have to score 8 out of 10. So, writer-director each get 2 points. Actor gets 1. And you have to have...
From the area.
From Canada, they have to be like a Canadian national, right? And then every head of the department gets 1 point. Post-production, things like that too. So Ireland has their own version, UK has their own version, and when you start blending the countries together, then they start realizing, yes, okay, but the funding and the qualifying for the co-productions can be separate issues. But you have to remember these are culturally funded organizations. They make their money from the government to promote their own local culture, and you have to make sure all those rules fit. And it gets kind of crazy when you're trying to EU is different. EU is like, oh, as long as you're EU, we can go work anywhere and just throw anybody from everywhere. Canada, not so much. Every time you bring in a new person, unless they're granted through the co-production office or through the treating, you actually have to say, it's going to be a DOP from this country. It's going to be the director from this country. And if we start changing things around last minute, we may not qualify them and we could blow the co-production and therefore lose potentially all our funding too. So that's why I get hired to help figure out and make sure things are on track, because a lot of filmmakers, when they go into the co-production, I think EU is the one that I get the most of. It's like, oh, we're just all EU, we can just work in, and it's true in Europe, but not so much in North America.
So if you're planning on doing a film specifically in a territory, it's important to understand what the rules are, what the regulations are, and as you attach, if you are on your own attaching a director or above the line, you understand that where they are from can make a big impact.
I'll give you like a really quick example of how this worked in a positive sense in treaty co-production. So the last one I did was with South Africa. And typically, if it was just a Canadian film, then we would be only allowed 1 American actor, right? And the second highest lead actor has to be Canadian too. But with the treaty with South Africa, they understand that all their talent, the black talent, is recognized are from the USA. So they allowed us to we had 5 American actors because we were a treaty with South Africa, right? And so we had 5, including Mike Epps and all these great veteran actors. But it was only because we had a South African treaty. And plus, it's great to shoot South Africa, tax incentives, costs, and things like that. But it was really because of creative reasons. We're making an American-style romantic comedy. And, for the black audiences, they recognize these actors. And so South Africa allowed that to happen. I couldn't have done that if it was a German-Canadian co-production, right? So those are the benefits of working with other countries, that if it was just a Canadian project, I wouldn't have been able to do that and qualify for the funding.
That's great. Alexia, I know I heard your webinar on Stage 32 where you were talking about the differences between producing in North America and then pretty much everywhere else, because the way that we put together deals and the financing for films are very, very different. So can you speak a little bit about that difference and perhaps what we could take from the way others do it and bring it into our plan?
Yeah, I think you and I had this discussion that in the United States, people would try to find money. In the United States, people would try to find money anywhere. They're not just relying on tax credits. They'll go to friends, they'll go to family, they'll do crowdfunding, they charge their credit. Oh, maybe I should do that. Yes, sorry. They'll charge their credit cards, and I think that's something that the European market hasn't tapped into yet. I mean, you're all going, oh gosh, I'm Italian. Like maybe if I tell a story that the Italian government will like, then I'm going to access this, but what about thinking outside of the box? I think we can all learn from one another. It's very, very true. I mean, the US filmmakers, they literally will go to their friends and say, give me $1,000 and I'll put you in a movie and I'll give you a credit. There is value to that. Because if you don't want to be sitting around waiting, like Sidney said, maybe 2 years, to not thinking about the legal cost of all that paperwork to do the tax credits and incentives. So think about that. There is ways, I mean, learn from your cohorts. There is ways to go. And the same thing, obviously, the Europeans are very, very good at thinking about how to do the right paperwork and everything, and we have no clue sometimes in the US. I'm like, oh yeah, shoot in Georgia. What am I supposed to do? I don't know, like find a blind producer and whatever. So I really think that there is a way that we can learn from one another, and I think I suggest, you're all from all over the world, that you just talk to one another and say, how did you do it? You made a short, you made a film, tell me how you got that done. Because, you need a lot of ideas to get something done. It's not just a unilateral way. So that's what I would advise to everyone.
So let's talk about the end of the process and what buyers are looking for internationally. Because I know Segolene, you had mentioned that there is a major need in the market right now. Can you kind of share that with the audience?
Sure. Yeah, just in terms of trends, like one of the things I've noticed in the past couple of years is the rise of Spanish language content for mostly America, but also just more broadly. A lot of adaptations are happening of also Latin American content, and vice versa, like Turkish shows being adapted into Spanish. So I think that's a huge opportunity. We are seeing like a growth of platforms in the US too that are coming up. Televisa and Univision just recently merged, and they have VIX, which is an all Spanish language platform. Panela TV is also an AVOD platform that's coming up, and it's privately owned. Their numbers are huge. And you're seeing like Apple TV now is creating ahead of Spanish language development, and they're all getting into it right now. So I think that's kind of like, because it's probably the second strongest language in the US, it's starting to become hugely popular, in addition to LATAM, which is seeing rising AVOD numbers, so people are watching things for free in high volumes, even though the CPMs are not quite there, so the money is not the same as in America, the audience is there. So as soon as the CPMs rise, CPM is like cost per mil for everyone who doesn't know, but it's an ad term for AVOD. So when your content is getting a lot of ads, that's how producers get paid. And so, that money is probably going to come up in the next 5 years, but at least the audiences are massive. So I personally think that's the next huge trend.
I think just speaking to that, because now audiences want, and the trending is, I just saw, the whole WGA strikes happening in the US and things like that. And what does Netflix do? We're going to spend $2.5 billion in Korea. Right? That's their answer, right? It's like, look, we can find content from around the world and make it as long as it's well told and well made, and usually a fraction of the cost of what it costs in North America. Then we're going to seek out and find out where our audiences are and what people want to. So I think there are really new growth opportunities to work in all sorts of languages, which is great. I think we're in this business to understand and talk to new people and learn about new cultures too. And I think it's a fun time, but it's like Wild West with film financing. It's like things changing. All my sales friends like, oh, the numbers are horrible and things like that. And so because I think there are more outlets, and again, a period of adjustment, just like VHS tapes cost a period of adjustment too, and DVDs and things like that. So I think it is, but again, well-told story that are well-made, that honestly knows who their audience is for and speaks to that audience. It's going to win time and time again, right? And then, you just need to have that perseverance. And I do agree with you that, because in Canada, we do have a bit of both. We get a lot of government funding and a lot of incentives, but, one of the big things our funders ask for is like, what's your market interest? Market interest being, where's the other money coming from, so we're not the only players in the game, right? Do you have a sales agent? Do you have MGs? Do you have private equity, right? Some of the bigger budget stuff, they want to see maybe at least 50% of your financing in place before they even look at that project to show that we're not just in it alone. There are other partners willing to risk it, and if it's commercial, and sometimes I think if it's all government funded, is it really a commercial project at some point? It is a bit of mix of both, right? And thankfully in Canada we have a pretty sophisticated system that, and again, we're here at this beautiful film festival, things like that, and there are going to be films that are bought and sold that are great, very big budget ones, but there will be a lot of films that will not get any distribution just because of the festivals too. So I think Europe has this festival mindset that we're only making it for the festivals. Like, yeah, but just because it's a festival, it doesn't necessarily mean it's also going to be commercially viable.
Yeah, I mean, as a buyer, I'm seeing a very wide spectrum. I'm seeing the Guy Ritchie movies that are selling like for $3-4 million per territory. And then you go into an asking price of a nice movie, say with Elizabeth Berkley, and then I will give you $25,000 for Italy, and you're going, how does that happen? But what the conversations that are happening with sales companies, and I think a lot of Europeans, is everybody knows to follow the Tubi model. So AVOD platforms are going to be sprouting like mushrooms all over the world. And I actually have seen the AVOD numbers. I mean, we just did, there's Italian directors that I represent, and they work with an AVOD platforms, and they asked them, can you make alien conspiracy documentaries for a price? And because we're seeing numbers, we're seeing the algorithm, and they ended up delivering 4 docs in a month. I'm not going to say the budget, but all I can say is that within 24 hours of the trailer being posted online, they had something like 250,000 views per trailer on something that wasn't even shot, which makes the AVOD channel very, very happy, because then they can sell ads. And so we're already seeing money. Before even the films have been released, we are seeing money. Granted, it's not millions, it's not, Guy Ritchie for $1 million, but if a filmmaker can make something and they can get a stream of, $5,000-$10,000 a month, I think that's a great business model. I mean, look at Winnie the Pooh. $75,000 budget, $6 million in revenue, okay? So there's something about that model. And again, I'm not a fan of horror, I'm not a fan of those movies. I mean, I do them because I give me credits and pays the bills, but I want to do the films that Sara is doing, for example, and I do them. But, it's an open field right now, so you got to look at every way that you can to get yourself established as a filmmaker, because when you go to a Tubi, you say, hey, I made a $100,000 movie and you made $6 million. Tubi's going to say, well, what are you got doing? Maybe we'll give you $1 million for your next one, right? There you go. It's numbers, and that's how you got the proof of concept. It's not box office, but hits and likes and engagement. There you go.
It's also low budget.
Yeah.
Which one?
Blair Witch at times,
Yeah.
Well, and so on the buying side, let's talk about what is trending. What are the genres, and what are you looking for in the films that are breaking out?
I think that's like a platform by platform question. So, an HBO Max is going to be very female skewing. Your Sex and the Cities, like they have their brand, they have their identity. So I can only speak really to Tubi. But again, as I was saying, if you look in the most watched section, that's where you're going to see like all the trending titles. And based on that, like really, I can't share the data, but we're making decisions from a place of data. So we know how many hours are getting watched. We know the minute you drop off a film. We know like the titles, the artwork. Sometimes it's just the poster stats, which is terrible. But like then we asked you to like go make a new poster because people aren't clicking on it, which is too bad because the film might be really good, but if the artwork is terrible or it's not inciting, no one's gonna click on it. So it's almost like, I feel bad saying this, it sounds like clickbait, but it really is. Like the tile that's on the platform, that's a lot of times what people are drawn to immediately if they don't know the movie.
Tile meaning the
Like the little
picture.
poster art, yeah.
Sorry.
No, you're right. And if you don't have like a name cast on that poster, it's really going to be about what is the story about, how cool does it look, do I want to watch this? And it could be something really campy, like she was saying, like what Math Gator, what was it? Like Shark Theater, or Winnie the Pooh or
Yeah, Math Gator.
Math Gator.
Math Gator.
Okay, Bear, Math Gator.
Yeah, so like all the Sharknadoes of the world do really well on Tubi because of the poster, the story. It's just something that people, I guess, can't find elsewhere too. So I think that's why it's a little bit different from like a Netflix or Amazon.
Just speaking from my own experience in the last film we did, it was interesting because, you know, if you think about these global streaming platforms, they're, you know, a subscription. It's like one household, one subscription kind of situation, and you need a volume business to sustain that business model. And so when Netflix bought our last film, because they wanted to expand into the African marketplace, right? And so that's what I was trying to look for, is like, where's the new growth markets around the world? You know, and seeing where the streamers want to put their money into, because that's going to be, whether it's going to be in the Philippines or, you know, Southeast Asia. You know, and Europe is pretty sophisticated already, but once they hit that saturation point, they're like, well, we can't grow anymore out of this territory. You know, if everybody in our territory already has Netflix, where do you go from there? They're looking at new countries to grow that from, right? And it's a complicated economic thing, but I do believe there are opportunities if you know, if you want to be on that forward edge of the trend. Again, when you're talking about sort of maybe countries that have emerging marketplaces, it is a real growth opportunity because you tend to find that the production costs are much lower than trying to shoot in North America.
So I'd like to open it up to questions from the audience. Michael?
Sure. Okay, is this working? Yeah. Thank you, sir. There's a question. A moment ago, you were talking about language, in particular Spanish. So I want to put a thought to you and your view on this. As far as if you have a project that could be done in English or Spanish, and your first market of sale is going to be North America, principally the United States, and probably reaching into Canada, and this has very much to do with the story, what it's all about. But naturally, it's a period piece, and naturally, it actually would have happened in Spanish. So the question is, do we want to do it in Spanish and be authentic, and also carry with that the burden of casting that is now in the Spanish realm? Or do we want to do English because we think it's more marketable and it's worth more money for sale? Where do you fall on that?
Good question.
Two of the most searched words on YouTube is Spanish speaking content. So yeah, Spanish movies, Spanish language film, Spanish speaking content. They are and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's true, right? I mean, to be here, to be. But that's what people are searching. So I think that the Latin market in the U.S. is so ripe to just start blowing up. I mean, and I think if you produce something in the Spanish language, obviously there's different accents, right? So you got Latam, you got Spain, and everything. But I think, and they love period stuff. I mean, look at all the telenovelas, right? A lot of them are set in period. So I would probably go Spanish. I really would. And I would just have actors that are good in Latin America and are trending, even in the US, and go that route. But I could be wrong. But that's what I know about the trending keywords.
Yeah, you said your main market is going to be North America?
It's a period piece that actually happens in North America, so it kind of like is, and it's also very folk. I mean, is
it going to be shot in North America?
It probably would be because it involves indigenous cultures as well. So.
Oh, that's a tricky one. Okay.
Yeah, it's even further layer because you get indigenous languages, which
you have like a very specific case, right?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
That one I don't know. I feel like you could start in English, but it really is going to pack your casting, right? So it's like, are you going with someone like Salma Hayek who can do both? You know, it's like, because you always have the option of also shooting in English and dubbing it in Spanish, and that would still do very well. So I think it really depends how you're.
Yeah, dubbing versus the subtitling, and it's kind of like, I mean, you know, with the success of Narcos back some years now, it suggested that okay, people are ready for this, and then of course now, and there was another session I think yesterday they talked about TikTokers getting so used to everything with subtitles, and so now it seems that people are less allergic to those things.
Right.
Yet there was also suggestion that English still would get you a higher budget.
That's the thing; you might get higher sales from something in English too, right? The numbers might be you're the salesperson, but yeah, there's that too. So I think it's more going to come down to how you want to cast it and your director as well.
The budget level, I think.
And your budget level.
So,
yeah.
you know,
So if you have the opportunity to shoot, I guess, in Mexico or somewhere else, and it's gonna,
it's a really good example of how we have to think globally, is creating something that's specific and yet still universal, and that you're asking the right questions. And that's where I think the research we were talking about earlier is, where are the best platforms for this, and then maybe try to find a way to really see what has worked, what hasn't worked, or maybe find somebody that you can consult with that is specifically working for them to gather that data.
Is it a discussion you can have with the platforms? I mean, to say, look, I could go either way on this. What works better for you folks? I mean, is that something? I mean, really?
I can go either way, guys.
Yeah. Where are you getting the money? I would say, what's your script language? Like, what's the language of the?
Like natural.
It would have naturally happened in Spanish because
So your
that's what they
script
were all
is in
speaking.
Spanish?
Yeah, well, I mean, the script we've written already is actually written in English,
Right.
thinking along the lines that it's going to be produced in English. But I mean, it was 16th century and they were speaking Spanish, so I mean, it's just that simple. That's what factually happened.
I feel like you could only have that conversation once you're in the room and
Right.
they read the script and they love the story.
Right.
And then you could ask that question of what are you looking for, and
That's exactly right. Let them
Right.
tell me what they really
kind
think
of
is
at that
going
point,
to
yes, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Question at the front
We
here.
have another question.
Okay.
Right. There you go.
Thank you. Mine was for you. So I know that it's no secret that short films really can't make much money. Like, it is possible, but it's very unlikely. And I did hear like this rumor like going around like Twitter and TikTok that you could, by putting your short film on Tubi, make money that way. Is that true, or is it just a thing?
So Tubi does absolutely not take short films.
No.
So I don't know where you heard that. Unfortunately, with AVOD, so this is the case probably with a lot of platforms like Pluto and Roku and all the other ones, is that because there's ads running on it and you want to maximize the amount of money you can make, the ads are timed either like on pre-roll, like you know how on YouTube you have your ads right at the beginning. A lot of times it's like 5 minutes in, and with Tubi it's 12 minutes in. So if you have a short film that's 10 minutes, you're not even making any ads, because theirs will start like 12 or 15 minutes once you're into the movie. So that's also the reason they don't take, they won't take like web series either, because the episodes are really short. So anything that's like longer than I would say like 22 minutes, you're fine, 25 minutes, but not shorts for that reason, because they can't even put that many ad breaks in it. So it's a business reason, business logic behind it. Yeah.
Anthologies? Well, I was short anthologies. I really one of those. Like when you put a collection of short stories.
Oh yeah. So if you're gonna stitch your short, I mean, it's just weird, because then like the person watching is gonna be like, yeah, I mean like edit it all together and like stitch it all together as one big movie or like one big show. But it'll look odd for a viewer who's like, well, I just saw 15 minutes of one thing and now it's like 10 minutes of something else. So they will just reject it outright. That's the only issue you face there.
Do you have any other questions?
Actually,
Let's pass the mic.
that might.
Hi, I'm wondering what resources all of you use to kind of keep your finger on the pulse of what is expanding.
So,
For me, I just attend the markets, and I use Stage 32 as the best education platform in the world, hands down. Not because we're educators as well, I'm sure a few of us, but honestly, if you want to know what's happening, go to those webinars, sign up, and listen to what the execs like ourselves. You just don't get us just in can. You can actually play on our courses and everything there, and really know in real time what's happening with everything in the business, from the distribution to the financing. So yay, Stage 32, and you still for Film USA for hosting us.
So two things I do is like I do sign up for like the screening daily, but also cover Europe and Asia and all the different territories, because I like to see what's coming out, what is getting the buzz and things like that. So just spend that morning time with your coffee and read the article. Like even if I don't read the articles, I just see this thing blip up and I track it or keep it in the back of my mind. I was like, oh, that's interesting. I do a lot of online modules, training modules for producing for diverse filmmakers who are just emerging in Canada too. So I do these 1 hour modules with PDF and things like that. And whenever I need to look up an article about, how does a recruitment plan, how does that work? Or how do I interim finance? And invariably, I will use Stage 32 articles. Like I do find stuff that's on Stage 32. It's like, this is exactly what I need. Not, like it's comprehensive, but not too into the weeds where it gets like lost, right? So if you're not familiar with how to, do interim financing, Stage 32 does have both people resources, and I think articles they can just look up and get a better understanding of too, so which is really useful.
I would like to add one thing also. While you're here in the market, just look at what people are selling, right? And ask some questions. If you get some distributors, don't hound them, don't try to say, will you pre-buy my movie? But maybe you can say, hey, buyer from Mexico, buyer from Spain, buyer from Germany, what are you looking for? Like, what are you buying in this market? They'll go, oh, I just bought this movie or I bought that one. They will share that info. They actually like to talk about themselves and see, like, what's working for them in that territory. So that's what I would suggest. I mean, I do that too for my buyers. I ask other buyers, because obviously I'm buying from many territories, but not the whole world. So I want to know also what other buyers are buying. It's important because that means if they're buying, that means they're pre-buying, that means that they're bankable contracts, which leads to financing of projects. Like Sara, who has a few her films with like good distributors, she did her homework, so there you go.
Yeah, I would say your trades are like the best way to find out what's happening right now. Definitely like looking at the growth of the market in terms of like we're talking about AVOD platforms. I think it's really good to keep up to speed of like what's the next AVOD platform, what are they doing, because they're driving the market right now with ads. Like Netflix is doing an ad tier, Hulu had an ad tier, everyone's going into ads now, which is the new thing. So I would say like one of the most important things you could look at is like the upfronts, right? The new fronts. Those are like the markets where people are going, they're the ad buyers. And they're going to be saying like, what new content do you have? We want to put ads on that content. So they're the ones actually dictating the market, which I know it's like, we're going into like a lot of economic talk right now, but it is the business side of things. And so they're going to be telling us like, hey, we want to spend on family content, or we want to spend on faith-based. And then Tubi is going to go and do faith-based content. So that's really how it works. We're also looking at the audience, but we also have a customer or a client, which is like the ad buyers, and they want to put ads on Tubi. So we're going to go and give them that. Sponsors too. Like a lot of movies are sponsored by, like Canela does a great job with this. They'll be sponsored by Target for the Latin American market. So it's huge. Like if you're thinking in their shoes, like what they want to do, then it's so much easier to come in and pitch. Like for me, I think one of the best pitches I'd heard, it was like a done deal because the guy had also gone and watched our CEO talk about the highest performing like show on Tubi, and he was like, I have the same cast and the same genre. Do you guys want it? And it was like, yeah, of course, we want like the same thing but better kind of situation because as long as the budget was the same, like we have a winner here. We know how that works, and so he had done his research, he had done his homework to what you were saying, like to your point, it's so important.
It's all really, really great advice, and I just want to add one thing because Alexia mentioned it. I think that my bit of advice would be filmmakers. You can't get directly to perhaps the Netflix, the Hulus, the Paramounts of the world, but the filmmakers that work with them are accessible. And our project that's being pre-sold at the market right now, it was because a producer that was working with them that I was having coffee with said, oh, and this sales agent is specifically looking for this. And that's when I could say, well, I have a script, I have a book you should look at. So networking, and I got stage 32, being at markets like this and talking to people, it's the more you can connect with filmmakers like yourself, oftentimes that's where the gold is. Because they're friends with the distributor and they got, the down low, or they just did a film so they happen to have the intel on that. So don't underestimate and just assume that you have to go to the big wigs for the information. It is, accessible amongst your peers and other filmmakers. So we have to wrap it up, but there's one more question. I saw your hand. We'll sneak in one more, and then we'll wrap up the panel.
So basically, my question is what you just said. If you are trying to get to the platform, and obviously there is no way if you haven't worked with them before, and you're trying to get to that producer who has worked with them, how do you get to that producer?
Oh, did you hear the questions? How then do you get to the producer? I think, does somebody else want to answer that, or, yeah.
Oh, I can take that, but you guys.
Well, I'm going to leave it to the panelists, but I will just say it's the package.
Yeah.
It is, what have you done to set that project up for success that's going to get my attention? And unfortunately, it's not the script, so that's where a really good deck comes in play. or attaching, having a director that's exciting, having cast that's exciting, or having, if you were a finalist in a prestigious screen competition, you just get so many people sending you content. It's really important that there be something that catches your attention, or do your research as to what my, I'm saying me just as the collective, what does their company, stand for? What do they gravitate towards? Stalk them on LinkedIn and see what their personal interests are, because you might have the content that is going to appeal to me because my mother, my father, or a family member suffered from that ailment, or went through that same experience. So at the end of the day, we're human. Producers, executives at all these agencies, managers. So you have to remember that connecting with the why is sometimes just really, really that simple. But you've got to lead in your email with that to get the attention.
Yes. Yes, and honestly, that's exactly what Sara said. Forget about, yes, the deck is great, the script is great. I teach pitching classes pre-markets at stage 32 every time there's a market. I coach a select group of filmmakers on how to be in the room. And one of the things that I noticed is that we're like the bank here. Nobody tries to connect to us as human beings. And I think people want to know, hey, by the way, I saw you do a live on Instagram. I really like what you said. It moved me. Or I saw, a show on Tubi. Were you behind that? Did you greenlight it? Tell me what the process is about. Lead with that first, whether it's an in-the-room pitch, whether it's a party situation, whether it's a query letter that says connect with your why first, but also connect with us, because we are not, honestly, if we were all millionaires, we would be in a yacht out here. We would not even be having this conversation. But yeah, the producers are the most underpaid people on the planet. So, you want to validate us because we're going to be your champions. We're going to be the ones who are going to get you into Tubi, right? And we're going to be the ones who are going to get you into protagonists. So, just use that heart-to-heart connection is the most important thing. And that's what I would say as a piece of advice.
Yeah, it's really interesting too, because I get that, like, how do I pitch? How do I prepare for the pitch? But one of the best advice I got from one of my early producer mentors, like, film industry, TV industry, it's one of the few people businesses left. We're not stuck in some cubicles like maybe some people are and look at data. But we do have to work with people on set in the development phase and communicate as well. And, I always took the notion that, like, I actually have a personal thing about pitching. I feel like it's a very transactional thing where it's like, I'm selling you this, you buy it, and if you don't like it, well, like, screw you kind of a thing, right? But it's like, you build a relationship. It's like, just because one thing doesn't work for them doesn't mean, it could be because I have 10 of these projects already and I can't take on another one, right? So building a relationship and growing those relationships, oftentimes it's like, oh, I know that person from this company, let me see if I can do a quick reach out and see if they can help out, right? So the more you meet people and the wider your network grows and you maintain like a genuine relationship with these people. I have great financier friends who I don't do any business, I just hang out with them, but I can always use them as resources. Like, hey, do you know this company? What do you think about them? And these are resources too. So if you think about it as less about I pitch, you buy, and that's end, it's a very short-sighted, relationship too. So, and same with funders. Don't get mad at the funders because they get so much stuff and they want so much money. So yeah.
That's it.
Oh, I think it's just always really hard when you get a response back that says, like, we don't accept unsolicited submissions. So I totally understand where you're coming from, and I think that's a really hard one, like, to navigate. I don't have advice for you on that one. I think it's like, you either have a manager or an agent. I think managers are really good to get around that email because they're easier to get too than an agent, and they'll really look after your career too and try to get you set up somewhere. So they might have that access that maybe a producer won't allow, right? The manager can actually open that door for you. So I know I said I didn't have an answer to that, but I think I was like,
Advantages of just passing a mic. So as we wrap up, I just once again want to thank Film USA, also Stage 32. I also want to thank Stage 32, who's hosting and brought this panel to you. I know we've referenced them a couple times, For those of you that are not members, it's the largest online platform connecting and educating global entertainment professionals. And I would highly encourage you to check out the site. There's over 1 million members now, and there's over 3,000 hours of education. We referenced it a lot here. And of course, that's a way that you can network with producers, creatives across the world. And if you are a member, or if you aren't, then you can sign up, and there's a huge party on Monday night that Stage 32 is sponsoring. It's 10 to 2. You have to be a member though, so I would go sign up and then check on the website, and you can actually register for the event. It's going to be huge. It's on a beach. When I was here last year, everyone was talking about how it was like their favorite party of the year before, so and I missed it, so I'm excited. And as we wrap that up, I'd just love to kind of pass the mic one more time to our panelists and maybe share what Stage 32 has meant to you and in your creative journey in relation to the topics we've had today.
I think it's funny because I actually met the whole Stage 32 team just last year in Canada. We were just like enjoying our time together and things like that, and I was asked to come in to talk about diversity filmmaking, right? And I think that was a very important topic to me because not just from, we were just joking about that because a lot of the government funders like, oh, we need diverse stories, but they don't quite understand there's a huge commercial value too, not just from a cultural standpoint when you have diverse storytelling. I was lucky enough to work on a Chinese film that grows over $80 million in the Chinese box office, US, right? And that for me is like, why can't we make more films that are diverse in nature in North America that speaks to a much wider audience? And I felt really lucky that I can talk to Stage 32 because, working with, diverse cultures isn't an easy thing because, whether or not you get a writer to talk about somebody else's culture, these are challenging questions to talk about too. And finding a space to people can ask those questions, I think was a very important thing. So Stage 32 was able to do that and curate talk about having diversity and what that really means when it feels authentic and genuine too.
To facilitate conversations that otherwise would not be happening.
Yeah.
I mean, Stage 32 really loves storytellers and really has your best interest at heart. I'm going to say proudly that about 1/3 of my production slate right now, it's from writers and filmmakers that I found on Stage 32. And what has impressed me so much, which is a testament of how fabulous they are and what great educators and how they put out really great content, to have your network, is that at the beginning I used to get all those pictures, do those pictures of people I didn't even know what they were doing, and now everyone is a freaking total pro. Like, I would say that probably now when people are pitching me, a good 80% of the ones who are pitching me now have the manners, have the knowledge, they're prepared. Before they were like a deer caught in headlights, and that's like a testament that they took the courses, they did the webinars, they did the practice on their pitches, and they got better. And I think that's thanks to Stage 32. And I love having Amanda and RB on my podcast. Check it out, The Harder Show Business. You'll get to know about their story of how they created it. And it's really moving and touching. So I'm honored to be part of their education team. They're not paying me for this. I'm just like, really just a fan. A super fan. So there you go.
Yeah, I work with a lot of writers that I found on Stage 32 as well, just doing a lot of feedback for them, and they're extraordinary writers on there. So I've been using it as a great tool just for that, to fighting creative talent. And I also watch the Stage 32 and Netflix, what is that, collaboration?
Yeah,
And all that
I love that.
content, because they'll break down, like, she's like the Queen's Gambit, and they'll go into, like, the whole, like, how they put that shit together, which is so impressive. So I also watch it for, like, my own personal development and how to be a better exec and just, like, learn from that, too.
And what she just referenced, to put it in context, is that Stage 32 is the one of the education partner for Cannes, for Netflix, AFM, over a dozen different commissions, all over the world. So that was that reference, and I will just yes and everything they said. The script that literally I just got the final drop today is from a writer that I found on Stage 32. So well, thank you all for coming. And there is, I believe there are cocktails after this as well, so stick around, and we wish you the best of luck making all of your projects a reality. Thanks.